These are not arranged in anatomical position. It's very hard to sort of stack the bones of the foot to get them in something that resembles an anatomical position. So instead we'll have a look through each of them, see how to recognise them and how they articulate with the other bones, and this then helps us side them and figure out if they're from the left or the right side of the body. So if we start off with the calcaneus, here's our calcaneus here. I'll zoom in a little bit. So this is probably the most obvious bone when you're just looking into a box of feet. It's the largest and it's the chunkiest. Features to note, so on the back edge, this is the heel, this very large non-articular surface. At the front we have two very large joint surfaces, one up here superiorly, one down here inferiorly, underneath this kind of flat shelf of bone here. And then on this side we've got this large bit of bone that projects out from the side. This is the sustentaculum tali, and this has a joint surface as well. This can look different on different individuals because of non-metric traits. So sometimes it might appear a bit larger, there might be two separate facets or a really long facet. It makes no difference to the individual, it just looks slightly different when we see it. So when we're siding the calcaneus, what you really want to look for is the position of the sustentaculum tali. This will be located on the medial side of the bone. So you've got a nice clear sort of edge on the lateral side of the bone. So that's really key for siding. If we move on and look at the talus, here's our talus, second largest bone of the tarsals. So it's got this very large, rounded sort of dome of a joint surface on the superior edge, which kind of has it's got two little bits that fold down the sides as well. So this is where the distal tibia articulates with the talus. This is your ankle joint. And then I suppose the other largest feature is this very bulbous, rounded part of the bone here, which is the head of the talus. So that's from the superior view. Here we are from the side, anteriorly, inferiorly, and then that's the posterior side. So siding with the talus, again, relatively simple in theory, because you want to look for the head of the talus. So look in the superior view, so you're looking down at it from on top, and the head should be further over to one side of the bone than the other. And this will be on the medial side of the bone. So that tells us that this is a right talus. Next up we'll do the navicular. So here's the navicular. So this is what it looks like from the front, or the anterior view. If we were looking down on the foot from the top, we'd see it like this. And here's the posterior side. So very, very large concave joint surface. And then on the plantar surface, it's kind of a bit crenulated. There's no real shape on the bottom there. But this big joint surface here, this articulates with the head of the talus. So they sit together like this. So it kind of makes more sense when you actually hold them together. So to side the navicular, you want to hold the deep facet for the talus towards you. So facing away from you will be this flatter articular surface at the front. And then you can see there's a very large bulbous edge to the bone on one side, and it's a bit more squashed and rectangular on the other side. So this rectangular edge is the lateral side, and the bulky edge is the medial side. That's the navicular. Next up, we'll do the cuneiforms. So there are 3 cuneiform bones. We have this one, which is the medial cuneiform, which is on the medial side of the foot. We have the intermediate cuneiform, which will articulate like this with the medial. And then we have the lateral cuneiform, which articulates like this. So they all kind of bunch together and form these 3 joint surfaces here, which in anatomical position would be posterior. And these articulate with that large anterior facet of the navicular. So they all sit together like, if my hands were bigger, more or less like this. So the joint surface on the navicular, actually you can feel at least 2 and then a third here, kind of contours to the joint surface, and that's so 1 for each of the cuneiforms. So the medial cuneiform is much taller than the other 2. And also, if you look on the medial side, it's got this very large non-articular portion of the bone, because obviously this is on the medial side of the foot, the inside of the foot. So there's nothing going on in this region. So we're looking at the posterior side of the bone here. So that facet that articulates with the navicular is down towards the plantar surface. So it's at the bottom side as we're looking at it. If we turn it around and look at the front side of the bone, we see this large joint surface that takes up the whole height of the bone. And this is where the first metatarsal is articulating. If you remember, the first metatarsal usually has that kind of kidney bean shaped articulation point, and this matches up with this one here on the medial cuneiform, so that those 2 bones articulate. So on the anterior side, very tall whole width of the bone facet. On the posterior side, smaller facet, more towards the plantar surface. So that can help you kind of orient the bone. Also up at the top, it's kind of thinner, not pointed, but it's certainly like a thinner wadge of bone, whereas it's quite thicker and rounded at the plantar side. And then on the very plantar surface, this as well is non-articular, because it's just the sole of the foot. So if we look to the lateral surface, we can see there's another articular surface here, just on the back top edge. So it's got 2 sort of sides to it. So one more vertical, one more horizontal at the top. This is where it articulates with the medial cuneiform. And if we look on the medial side of the it's the intermediate cuneiform, sorry. If we look on the medial side of that, we'll see again the similar shape to the facet with a vertical section and a horizontal section at the top. So they articulate with one another like so. And then also, if you hold, let's move that to the side. If you hold the intermediate cuneiform, so you've got this flat non-articular portion at the top. So this is actually the top of the foot. If you put your fingers on either side, the front and the back of the bone, you'll feel that one edge, and it's the back edge, has a more concave surface. So there's a bit more of a dip in it. whereas the anterior side is slightly more convex, so it like bulges out in the middle. You can feel that quite well if you hold the bone between two fingers. So that can sometimes help with the siding. And then the dorsal surface, non-articular, kind of forms a little square. But then on the plantar side, this is much more pinched, sort of squeezed together at the bottom. So it comes more into a point, like a strange, like pyramid shape, so that very pinched edge at the bottom. And then if we look to the lateral side, we have this sort of large facet down the back side of the bone, and that articulates with a similar shaped facet on the medial side of the lateral cuneiform. So if we, there we go, and then they articulate like this. So they sometimes look like they sit a little bit awkwardly, like these ones, but you have to remember there'd be soft tissue structures as well in the cartilage covering the bones. So it's often not a nice tight articulation. But you can recognise the intermediate cuneiform from the lateral cuneiform because the intermediate has this square dorsal surface, whereas the lateral cuneiform, it's more rectangular. It's a bit more elongated. And then on the lateral side of the lateral cuneiform, we have this more kind of rounded facet. Sometimes it extends a little bit down the side of the bone as well, down the back edge. So, and that's all towards sort of, the posterior side of the bone, whereas the more anterior half, it's just that rough, non-articular area. So this articulates with our final tarsal, which is the cuboid. So they sit together like that. And then a little bit of a joint surface here as well. That's for the navicular, which, if you remember, is sitting sort of on the back portion. Whoops. Around here. Looks a bit uncomfortable, but it's very difficult to hold the bones of the feet in any kind of articulation. So back to the cuboid. So our final tarsal. On the posterior side, a large, slightly sort of diagonal facet. So this articulates with the calcaneus. So this lower articular surface of the calcaneus, kind of like this. So we always say that this is kind of the top of the cuboid, but it's not really, because when it's in anatomical position, it's kind of on the side, like the outside of the foot. And that facet where it connects to the lateral cuneiform is actually kind of poking more upwards. But so what we call the dorsal surface is, well, it's not smooth, but it feels quite flat when you run a finger over it, whereas on the plantar side, it's a much more kind of lumpy, bumpy surface. So that can help you figure out which is up and which is down. Then at the front, we have this large, kind of like flatter joint surface, and certainly much flatter than this diagonal joint surface at the back. And then on the very lateral side, because it's the edge of the foot and it's not articulating with anything else, it's this rather odd-shaped, non-articular surface. There's kind of a groove in there, but certainly no joint surfaces on the lateral side of the cuboid.